Admiral Zeftar of the Kytherian Empire stood before the massive holographic display showing the spiral arm of the galaxy where a peculiar species had been discovered. The blue-scaled reptilian commander's eyes glowed with anticipation as he reviewed the intelligence reports from her scout ships. After centuries of expanding across the stars, conquering dozens of species, the Kytherians had finally encountered something that might provide genuine entertainment. Humans, he said, tasting the alien word, from a planet they call Earth in the Sol system. His tactical officer, Commander Vexenel, stepped forward with additional data streaming across her portable display. Sir, our scouts report that these creatures are remarkably primitive. They've barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology is crude, and their military capabilities appear laughably outdated compared to our standards. Zeftar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his species. The Kytherians had perfected the art of warfare over millennia. Their plasma weaponry could slice through mountain ranges, their shield technology could withstand the heat of stars, and their massive dreadnought fleets had never known defeat. Every species they had encountered either surrendered immediately upon witnessing their power or was crushed within days of declaring resistance. What makes these humans particularly interesting? Zeftar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They refuse to surrender, sir, Vexenel replied, her tone carrying a mixture of confusion and intrigue. Our diplomatic vessels approached their outer colonies with standard surrender ultimatums. The humans not only refused, but actually fired upon our ships. This was unprecedented. Most species, upon seeing even a single Kytherian cruiser, would immediately contact their governments to arrange unconditional surrender. The few that attempted resistance usually lasted no more than a solar cycle before their leadership saw reason. But humans had actually attacked Kytherian vessels. Casualties? Septaring Kvayid. Minimal, sir. Their weapons barely scratched our hull plating. However, what's remarkable is their persistence. After their initial attacks failed, they continued firing until their ammunition was depleted. Then, they attempted ramming maneuvers. Zeftar's interest was truly piqued now. Ramming maneuvers were the desperate acts of a species that had completely lost rational thought. Yet there was something almost admirable about such determination, even if it was ultimately futile. "Show me their homeworld," he commanded. The holographic display shifted to show a blue-green planet orbiting a yellow star. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, similar to thousands of other inhabited worlds the Kytherians had cataloged. But as the detailed scans populated the display, Zeftar began to understand why the humans might be different. "By the ancient void," whispered Vexenel, as the atmospheric readings became visible. Earth's gravity was nearly double that of most inhabited worlds. The oxygen concentration was so high it would be toxic to many species, while somehow remaining stable instead of igniting the entire atmosphere. The planet's surface showed evidence of massive geological activity. Active volcanoes, shifting tectonic plates, and violent weather systems that would devastate most civilizations. "Look at these storm patterns," Vexenel continued, highlighting massive hurricane formations. "These atmospheric disturbances generate more energy than our capital ship weapons, and they occur naturally, regularly." But what truly caught Zeftar's attention were the biological readings. Earth wasn't just inhabited by humans. It was teeming with life forms that defied conventional understanding of habitability. Creatures that thrived in crushing ocean depths, predators with bite forces that could shatter metal, microscopic organisms that could survive in the vacuum of space. "This is a death world," he realized aloud. Death worlds were legendary in galactic civilization. Planets so hostile that they supposedly forged species into something beyond normal parameters. Most xenobiologists considered them theoretical. The idea that any intelligent species could evolve on such a planet was considered impossible by Kytherian science. Yet here were the humans, not just surviving, but thriving on a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over during their evolutionary development. "Sir, there's more," Vexenel said, bringing up historical data their long-range scanners had gathered. Their species didn't just evolve to survive this environment. They've been at war with it and each other for their entire recorded history. The data showed human civilization as an endless series of conflicts. Not just wars between nations, but struggles against their own planet's attempts to destroy them. Ice ages that should have driven them extinct instead forced them to innovate. Volcanic eruptions that should have ended their civilizations became opportunities for them to rebuild stronger. Plagues that should have wiped them out only made them more resistant. And through it all, they had been fighting each other with an intensity that impressed even Kytherian military analysts. Their weapons development had been driven not by conquest of space, but by the need to destroy other humans more efficiently. They had created tools of destruction that could end their own species, then somehow found the wisdom not to use them while keeping them ready as threats. Their military doctrine is unusual, Vexenel noted, pulling up tactical analyses. They don't appear to have a single unified approach to warfare. Instead, they've developed dozens of different strategic philosophies, often contradictory, sometimes within the same military force. Zeftar studied the human military structures. Unlike Kytherian forces, which followed precise hierarchical protocols developed over centuries of successful conquest, human militaries seemed almost chaotic. Yet within that chaos, patterns emerged, adaptability, improvisation, and a willingness to sacrifice that went beyond mere tactical necessity. Look at this engagement. Vexenel highlighted a historical battle. A small force of humans held a strategic position against overwhelming odds for months, not because it was tactically necessary, but because they refused to retreat. They called it honor. Honor was a concept the Kytherians understood intellectually, but had never encountered in practice. Their conquests were efficient, calculated affairs. Enemies who recognized superior force surrendered, preserving their lives and resources for integration into the empire. The idea of fighting to the death for abstract principles was fascinating from an academic standpoint and deeply troubling from a military one. Were there space-based capabilities? Zeftar asked. The display shifted to show human spacecraft, crude, angular vessels that looked more like flying weapons platforms than proper starships. Their faster-than-light technology was primitive, their shields were basic energy barriers, and their weapons were kinetic projectiles and simple energy beams. Pathetic, Zeftar initially assessed. Then he looked closer. Human ship designs prioritized redundancy over efficiency. Where Kytherian vessels were elegant, streamlined craft that maximized performance, human ships were built like their creators, tough, stubborn, and nearly impossible to completely destroy. They had multiple backup systems for critical functions, compartmentalized damage control, and weapons that could operate independently even if the main ship was crippled. Their largest vessels appeared to be designed for extended campaigns far from supply lines, Vexenel observed. Unlike our ships, which rely on regular resupply from the Empire's logistics network, human vessels carry everything they need for months of independent operation. This was another puzzle. The Kytherian Empire's strength came from its vast industrial base and supply networks. Their ships were marvels of engineering precisely because they didn't need to waste space on self-sufficiency. But humans had designed their space navy as if they expected to be cut off from support, as if they were planning for a war they couldn't afford to lose. "Show me their response to our diplomatic contact," Zeftar commanded. The communications logs appeared, and Zeftar found himself staring at something unprecedented in his career. The human diplomatic response wasn't a surrender, wasn't a negotiation, wasn't even a proper rejection. It was a declaration of intent that seemed to come from an entirely different understanding of reality. The human representative, a female with gray hair and steel-gray eyes, had listened to the Kytherian surrender ultimatum without emotion. When it concluded, she had simply said, "We decline your offer." Earth and her colonies will remain free. Any attempt to subjugate humanity will be met with total resistance. We suggest you reconsider your intentions. Then, she had severed the communication link. Total resistance. Zeftar repeated the phrase. What does that mean in their context? Vexanael brought up anthropological studies their scouts had compiled. Based on their history, sir, it means they intend to fight until either they win or their species is extinct. They have no concept of honorable surrender when their independence is threatened. This was beyond Zeftar's experience. Every species the Empire had encountered understood that survival was preferable to destruction. Populations might resist initially, but faced with overwhelming force, reason eventually prevailed. Leaders emerged who recognized reality and negotiated terms that preserved their people's lives, even if it meant accepting subjugation. But humans seemed to operate from different principles entirely. Their history showed instances where they had chosen collective death over surrender, had fought to literally the last individual rather than submit to conquerors. It wasn't tactical, it was philosophical. Prepare the Third Fleet for deployment, Zeftar decided. We'll begin with a standard subjugation campaign. Destroy their military installations, eliminate their space-based defenses, and demonstrate the futility of resistance. Once they understand the reality of their situation, they'll surrender like every other species. But as he gave the orders, Zeftar found himself studying the data on human evolution again. Deathworld organisms, by definition, were shaped by constant struggle against forces that sought to destroy them. They developed not just physical adaptations, but behavioral ones, instincts, and responses that prioritize survival of the species over survival of the individual. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Zeftar felt something he hadn't experienced since his early days as a junior officer facing his first combat situation. It wasn't fear. Kytherians didn't fear primitive species with inferior technology. But it was uncertainty, a recognition that this conquest might not follow the familiar patterns that had brought the Empire centuries of easy victory. The Third Fleet was the Empire's standard subjugation force, 50 dreadnoughts, 200 cruisers, and support vessels carrying enough firepower to sterilize a planet's surface. It was overwhelming force by any reasonable measure, designed to end resistance before it could properly begin. As the fleet prepared for departure, Zeftar reviewed the tactical projections one final time. Every simulation showed the same result. Human resistance would collapse within days of the fleet's arrival. Their primitive weapons couldn't penetrate Kytherian shields, their ships couldn't outmaneuver Kytherian vessels, and their numbers were insignificant compared to the Empire's military might. Yet something about the data troubled him. Humans had survived on a death world not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through adaptability and refusal to accept defeat. They had conquered their own hostile planet not by avoiding its dangers, but by learning to thrive in conditions that should have killed them. The Third Fleet departed for Sol System with Admiral Zeftar confident in victory, but for the first time in his career, genuinely uncertain about what form that victory would take. Behind them, they left a galaxy that had known Kytherian dominance for so long that resistance had become merely a theoretical concept. Ahead lay a small yellow star, and a blue world whose inhabitants had just received their first lesson in galactic politics. What the Kytherians didn't yet understand was that humans had been receiving lessons in survival from a much harsher teacher for their entire evolutionary history. Earth waited, and, with it, a species that had learned to treat the impossible as merely another problem to be solved. The Kytherian Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol System with a precision that had made the Empire's military legendary. Admiral Zeftar watched from his command ship's bridge as sensors painted a tactical picture of human space defenses and immediately felt the first stirring of confusion. "Sir, the human fleet isn't retreating," Commander Vexanael reported, her voice carrying surprise. "They're advancing to meet us. This wasn't supposed to happen." Standard Imperial doctrine called for a show of overwhelming force at the edge of system, allowing the defending species time to recognize their hopeless situation and arrange surrender. Most civilizations used this grace period to evacuate their civilian populations and prepare for negotiations. Instead, every human military vessel in the system was burning toward them at maximum acceleration. "How many ships are they committing?" Zeftar asked. "All of them, sir. Every military vessel, every armed civilian ship, even converted cargo haulers with weapons strapped to their hulls. Total count is approximately 800 vessels." Zeftar's mandibles clicked dismissively. 800 primitive ships against the Empire's most powerful subjugation fleet was barely worth calling a battle. It's something about the human approach bothered him. Their ships weren't arranging themselves in any recognizable battle formation. Instead, they seemed to be organizing into small, independent groups, each taking slightly different vectors toward the Kytherian fleet. Tactical analysis? Unclear, sir. Their formation doesn't match any standard strategic doctrine. If anything, it appears designed to maximize their casualties while minimizing their effectiveness. But as the human ships drew closer, their strategy began to reveal itself. The smaller, faster vessels were accelerating far beyond safe parameters, pushing their engines to levels that should have torn their ships apart. Meanwhile, the larger ships were falling back slightly, creating depth in their formation. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel." "Display it." The main screen flickered to show the bridge of a human warship. The commanding officer was a tall male with graying hair and scars across his face that spoke of previous combat experience. Behind him, Zeftar could see the human crew working with an intensity that bordered on desperation, but their expressions showed determination rather than fear. "Kytherian fleet, this is Admiral Chun of the Earth Defense Force. You have entered human space with hostile intent and refuse to withdraw. In accordance with the laws of war, you are hereby notified that we will defend our territory with all available force." The transmission cut before Zeftar could respond. "Laws of war," Vexanael questioned. "What are they referring to?" Zeftar had no answer. The Empire's conquests had never involved formal declarations or legal frameworks. Superior force was applied until resistance ceased. The concept of laws governing warfare was as alien to him as the human tactical approach. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "Target their largest vessels first. Once their command structure is eliminated, the rest will surrender." The Kytherian dreadnoughts opened fire, sending streams of plasma that could cut through asteroids toward the approaching human fleet. At this range, against ships with primitive shielding, the battle should have ended in moments. Instead, Zeftar watched in amazement as the human formation exploded into motion. The smaller ships that had been accelerating beyond safe limits suddenly revealed their purpose. They weren't attacking, they were screening. As Kytherian plasma beams reached for the larger human vessels, the smaller ships threw themselves into the paths of incoming fire, accepting destruction to protect their fleet mates. Impossible, Vexnal breted. They're deliberately sacrificing their own ships. But it wasn't random sacrifice. Each intercepting vessel was positioned to protect multiple larger ships, and as they died, they transmitted targeting data and tactical updates to the surviving fleet. The humans were treating their own ships as expendable resources in service of a larger strategy. "Sir, multiple human vessels are beginning attack runs. Their weapons are unconventional." The surviving human ships had closed the combat range, and Zeftar realized that his tactical assessments had been fundamentally flawed. Human weapons weren't just primitive energy beams and kinetic projectiles. They were anything the humans could improvise into a weapon. Cargo ships rammed Kytherian cruisers, their hulls packed with explosives. Mining vessels used industrial cutting lasers to slice through shield generators. Even civilian ships had been converted into missile platforms, firing volleys of nuclear warheads that, while ineffective against Kytherian armor, created electromagnetic interference that disrupted targeting systems. Their tactics make no sense. VexNAL reported. They're accepting massive casualties for minimal damage to our fleet. But Zeftar was beginning to understand. The humans weren't trying to win this battle. They were learning from it. Every attack, successful or failed, generated data about Kytherian capabilities. Every human ship that died transmitted information about Imperial weapons, shields, and tactics to the rest of the fleet. Sir, we're receiving priority communications from multiple human vessels. They appear to be taunting us. Taunting, listen to this. Hey Kytherian, my grandmother hits harder than your plasma cannons. And this one, is that all you've got? My planet's volcanoes are scarier than your ships. Zeftar was baffled. Psychological warfare was understandable, but these humans seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves while dying. Their communications showed no fear, no desperation, just an almost predatory excitement about engaging a superior enemy. The battle continued for hours, far longer than any Imperial engagement in recent memory. Human ships kept arriving from across the system, vessels that had been mining asteroids, exploring the outer planets, or conducting deep space missions. Each new arrival brought different tactics, different weapons, different approaches to the problem of fighting Kytherian ships. Admiral, we need to pull back and reassess, VexNL suggested as damage reports began flowing in from the fleet. We're sustaining losses. This was unprecedented. The Third Fleet hadn't just emerged victorious from every previous engagement. It had usually emerged unscathed. Now, 23 Kytherian vessels had been destroyed or seriously damaged by an enemy that should have been swept aside effortlessly. Sir, incoming transmission from Earth. Display it. This time, the screen showed a different human, an elderly male in what appeared to be a civilian government facility. Behind him, Zeftar could see other humans working frantically at computer terminals. Admiral Zeftar of the Kytherian Empire, the human said, somehow knowing his name despite never having been introduced. This is Secretary General Morrison of the United Earth Government. I'm calling to inform you that your fleet's arrival has triggered certain automatic responses. What responses? Zeftar found himself asking. Every human colony, every deep space station, every exploration vessel beyond your current sensor range has just received detailed intelligence about your fleet's capabilities, weaknesses, and tactics. They're sharing this information with each other and preparing their own responses. Morrison paused, and his expression became almost sympathetic. You see, Admiral, you made a fundamental error in your approach. You treated this as a traditional conquest, assuming that defeating our military would lead to surrender. But humans don't surrender when our survival is threatened. We adapt. The transmission ended, leaving Zeftar staring at a tactical display that suddenly looked much more ominous. Intelligence reports began flowing in from Imperial scouts positioned throughout human space. Every human facility was mobilizing. Not just military bases, but civilian infrastructure, research stations, even academic institutions. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the human homeworld, VexNAL reported. It appears they're activating some kind of planetary defense system. Earth's energy output had increased dramatically, but not in any pattern the Kytherians recognized. It wasn't weapons charging or shields activating. It was something else entirely. What are they doing? Unknown, sir. The energy patterns don't match any technology in our databases. Then, space around Earth began to change. Massive structures emerged from the planet's gravity well. Not ships, but installations that had been hidden in the planet's magnetosphere, disguised as natural phenomena. They were vast, clearly built over decades, and they were powering up systems that Kytherian sensors couldn't identify. Sir, those installations, they're not military. What? They're industrial, sir. Massive manufacturing facilities. The humans have been building a fleet. As if summoned by the installation's activation, new contacts began appearing on sensors. Not the primitive human vessels they've been fighting, but something entirely different. These ships emerge from concealment throughout the inner system, sleek angular craft that looked nothing like the crude vessels the humans had been using. "How many?" Zeftar asked. "Still counting, sir. At least 1,500. Possibly more." The new human fleet approached with the same fearless aggression as their predecessors, but these ships moved with precision that matched Imperial standards. As they drew closer, Kytherian sensors began analyzing their capabilities and finding results that challenged everything they'd understood about human technology. "Sir, their weapons appear to be our weapons. Impossible. They're firing plasma beams identical to our own design. Their shields are generating frequencies that match our defensive systems. Admiral, they've reverse-engineered our technology." Zeftar realized with dawning horror that the first wave of human ships hadn't been trying to win. They'd been gathering intelligence. Every destroyed human vessel had transmitted data about Imperial weapons and defenses. Every Kytherian ship that had fired its weapons had revealed technical specifications. The humans had turned the entire battle into a massive intelligence-gathering operation. But how could they reverse-engineer our technology so quickly? "Sir, remember their planet's environment. They evolved under conditions that required rapid adaptation to survive. Their entire civilization is built around analyzing threats and developing countermeasures." The new human fleet opened fire, and Zeftar watched his tactical display light up with incoming plasma beams that matched his own fleet's firepower. But the humans weren't just copying Kytherian weapons, they were improving them. Human plasma beams fired in coordinated volleys that overwhelmed individual ship defenses. Their shields flickered and shifted frequencies, making it impossible for Kytherian weapons to find consistent targeting solutions. Most disturbing of all, they were using Kytherian tactical doctrine against them, applying Imperial strategies with an understanding of their weaknesses that only came from extensive study. "They've been watching us," Zeftar realized. "Not just this battle, but our entire expansion across the galaxy. They've been studying every conquest, analyzing every victory, preparing for this moment." The battle turned decisively against the Kytherian fleet as more human vessels continued to arrive. These weren't desperate defenders anymore. They were predators who had studied their prey extensively and were now applying lessons learned from centuries of conquest. "Admiral, recommend immediate withdrawal," Vexenel urged as damage reports cascaded across the command displays. But as the Third Fleet began its retreat, Zeftar realized that the humans had revealed something far more terrifying than their technological capabilities. They had demonstrated that they could learn, adapt, and improve faster than the Empire could respond. Every battle would teach them more. Every engagement would make them stronger. And unlike every other species the Empire had encountered, humans seemed to view warfare not as something to be endured, but as a problem to be solved through application of intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. As the Kytherian fleet fled toward the edge of the system, Admiral Zeftar found himself contemplating a possibility that no Imperial commander had ever seriously considered, that the Empire might have finally encountered an enemy it couldn't defeat. Emperor Kreshtar of the Kytherian Empire studied the battle reports from Sol System with growing disbelief. In 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, no enemy had ever forced a full fleet retreat. Yet Admiral Zeftar's Third Fleet had limped back to Imperial space with nearly 60% casualties, and a tale that challenged everything the Empire understood about warfare. "You're certain of these reports?" the Emperor asked, his deep voice echoing in the vast throne chamber. "Confirmed by multiple sources, Your Imperial Majesty," replied Grand Admiral Mextan, Supreme Commander of all Imperial forces. "The humans not only resisted our standard subjugation protocol, but actively learned from the engagement. Their technological advancement during the battle was unprecedented." The Emperor's four eyes focused on the tactical displays surrounding his throne. Each screen showed different aspects of human capability, and all of them painted a picture that defied Imperial experience. These creatures had taken their primitive technology and within hours of first contact with superior Imperial systems, had begun producing weapons and defenses that matched or exceeded Kytherian standards. How is such rapid advancement possible? Analysis suggests it's related to their evolutionary environment, Majesty. Deathworlds produce species with enhanced adaptive capabilities. But these humans have taken adaptation to levels we've never encountered. The Emperor gestured, and the displays shifted to show human space. Intelligence reports from Imperial scouts painted a picture of frantic activity across dozens of star systems. Human colonies that had been primitive outposts just days before were now showing massive industrial expansion. Their merchant vessels had been converted into warships. Their research stations were producing new weapon designs at a rate that suggested they had entirely repurposed their civilization for warfare. Show me their communications intercepts. The main display flickered to reveal translated human communications, and the Emperor found himself confronting another alien concept. Instead of the panic and despair that usually followed Imperial contact, human communications showed excitement, determination, and something that Imperial translators were struggling to convey accurately. "They're enjoying this?" the Emperor questioned. "That appears to be correct, Majesty. Human communications suggest they view our attack not as a catastrophe, but as what they term the ultimate challenge. Their species appears to find satisfaction in overcoming seemingly impossible odds." This was beyond the Emperor's comprehension. Every species the Empire had conquered understood that survival was preferable to destruction. Populations might resist initially, but faced with overwhelming force, self-preservation eventually prevailed. Yet humans seemed energized by the prospect of fighting a superior enemy. What are their strategic capabilities? Grand Admiral Mextan activated new displays showing human industrial capacity. This is where the situation becomes concerning, Majesty. Human manufacturing infrastructure wasn't designed for efficiency like ours. Instead, it's built for rapid conversion and scaling. They can retool civilian facilities for military production faster than we can deploy reinforcements. The data showed human shipyards that had been building cargo vessels, now producing warships. Mining operations had been converted into weapons factories. Even their food production facilities were being modified to support extended military campaigns. But surely their primitive technology limits their effectiveness? No longer, Majesty. Intelligence indicates they've not only reverse-engineered our weapons and defenses, but begun improving them. Their approach to technology development is unlike anything in our experience. The Emperor examined detailed reports of human technological progress, where Kytherian advancement followed careful, methodical processes refined over millennia. Humans appeared to treat technological development like warfare itself, rapid, aggressive, and willing to accept massive risks for potential breakthroughs. They're testing new weapon designs in actual combat, Grand Admiral Mextan continued. Most fail catastrophically, often destroying their own ships. But the few that succeed are immediately transmitted to their entire fleet and improved upon. They're using trial and error on a massive scale. That's madness. The casualties must be enormous. They are, Majesty. But humans appear to view those casualties as acceptable losses in service of technological advancement. Their entire species seems willing to sacrifice individuals for collective improvement. The Emperor contemplated this information while reviewing intelligence about human space expansion. Their colonies weren't following imperial patterns of careful, methodical settlement. Instead, humans were establishing footholds in systems that should have been uninhabitable, worlds with extreme gravity, toxic atmospheres, or dangerous radiation levels. Why are they colonizing Deathworlds? Analysis suggests they prefer them, Majesty. Hostile environments appear to stimulate human innovation and adaptation. They're not avoiding dangerous conditions, they're seeking them out. This revelation put human capabilities in an entirely new perspective. The empire expanded by finding suitable worlds and terraforming them to imperial standards. Humans were expanding by finding unsuitable worlds and adapting themselves to survive on them. Every hostile environment was making them stronger, more resilient, and more capable. Show me their military doctrine. The tactical displays revealed the most disturbing aspect of human capabilities. Unlike imperial forces, which followed standardized protocols developed over centuries of successful conquest, human military doctrine was chaos given structure. Different units used completely different tactics, often within the same engagement. They appear to have no single approach to warfare, the Grand Admiral explained. Instead, they've developed dozens of different strategic philosophies simultaneously. Some favor direct assault, others prefer guerrilla tactics. Some focus on technological superiority, others emphasize numerical advantage through rapid reproduction of forces. How can they coordinate such divergent approaches? They don't coordinate in any way we recognize, Majesty. Instead, they seem to let different units experiment with different tactics and then adopt whatever proves most effective. It's as if their entire military is a testing ground for strategic innovation. The Emperor found this concept deeply troubling. Imperial military efficiency came from standardization and predictability. Every unit knew exactly how every other unit would respond in any given situation. Human military forces appeared to operate on the principle that unpredictability itself was a strategic advantage. What are their defensive preparations? New displays showed human space as a maze of fortifications, industrial complexes, and hidden weapons platforms. But, unlike imperial defenses, which focus on creating impregnable barriers, human defenses seem designed to channel attackers into killing zones while providing multiple fallback positions. They're not trying to stop an invasion, Majesty. They're trying to make conquest so costly that victory becomes meaningless. The Emperor studied defensive installations that looked more like traps than fortifications. Human strategy appeared to be based on the assumption that any enemy strong enough to attack them would eventually break through their defenses. Instead of preventing penetration, they were planning to make every meter of advance cost the attacker dearly. Analysis of human defensive philosophy suggests they're willing to sacrifice entire star systems if it weakens enemy forces sufficiently, the Grand Admiral continued. They're treating their own territory as expendable terrain in a larger strategic framework. This was warfare on a scale the Empire had never encountered. Imperial conquests relied on capturing enemy infrastructure intact and integrating it into the Empire's industrial base. Humans appeared willing to destroy everything rather than allow it to be captured. What do they hope to achieve? Even if they inflict heavy casualties, they cannot match our overall military capacity. Intelligence suggests they're not trying to match our capacity, Majesty. They're trying to exceed it. The displays shifted to show human expansion patterns projected forward. If their current rate of growth continued, human industrial capacity would double every few months. Their population was expanding through aggressive colonization of hostile worlds that other species couldn't survive on. Their military production was scaling at rates that defied conventional economic models. They're turning their entire civilization into a war machine, the Grand Admiral explained. Not just their military, but their economy, their research infrastructure, their social systems. Everything is being optimized for conflict on a galactic scale. The Emperor contemplated the implications. The Kytherian Empire's strength came from its vast size and accumulated resources built over millennia. But humans were demonstrating that rapid growth and adaptation could challenge even overwhelming numerical superiority. Recommendations? We have 3 options, Majesty. First, we could attempt another direct assault with larger forces. Second, we could try diplomatic negotiation. Third, we could withdraw and avoid human space entirely. The Emperor considered each option. A larger assault would certainly succeed initially, but intelligence suggested that every engagement would accelerate human development while depleting Imperial resources. Diplomatic negotiation assumed humans would accept terms other than complete independence, which their communications strongly suggested they wouldn't. Withdrawal would mean acknowledging that the Empire had encountered an enemy it couldn't defeat. What would be required for a successful conquest? Conservative estimates suggest we would need to commit 70% of our total military capacity and accept casualties approaching 50% of deployed forces. Victory would leave the Empire significantly weakened and human space completely devastated. And even then, victory is not guaranteed. Majesty. Human adaptive capabilities mean they could potentially develop countermeasures to any strategy we employ. They appear to treat impossible odds as motivation rather than discouragement. The Emperor stared at the tactical displays showing human space, a growing network of fortified systems manned by a species that seemed to view galactic war as the ultimate test of their capabilities. For the first time in Imperial history, expansion had encountered a barrier that couldn't be overcome through superior force or advanced technology. There's one more factor to consider, Majesty, the Grand Admiral added reluctantly. Speak. Intelligence reports suggest that other species are watching this conflict closely. If humans successfully resist Imperial conquest, it could inspire rebellion throughout our territory. This was the nightmare scenario that Imperial strategic doctrine was designed to prevent. The Empire's vast size meant that most subject species accepted Kytherian rule because resistance seemed futile. But if humans demonstrated that resistance was possible, the Empire could face uprisings across dozens of systems simultaneously. Prepare contingency plans for both scenarios, the Emperor ordered. We'll need strategies for total war against humans and for suppressing potential rebellions among subject species. As his advisors departed to implement these orders, Emperor Kreshtar remained alone with the tactical displays showing human space. For 3 millennia, the Kytherian Empire had expanded through the galaxy by applying overwhelming force against civilizations that, once defeated, accepted imperial rule as preferable to extinction. Now they faced a species that seemed to prefer extinction to subjugation and possessed the capability to adapt quickly enough that defeat only made them stronger. For the first time in Imperial history, the Empire faced the possibility that expansion might have reached its limits. What the Emperor didn't yet understand was that humans weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for the right of any species to remain free in a galaxy dominated by Imperial conquest. And they were beginning to suspect that the galaxy contained many other species who had been waiting for someone strong enough to challenge Kytherian rule. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned UES Determination, watching as the largest human fleet ever assembled prepared for what intelligence reports suggested would be the final battle of the war. 18 months had passed since the Kytherians first entered Sol System, and humanity had used every day to transform itself into something the galaxy had never seen. Status report, she requested, though she already knew the numbers by heart. 1,200 capital ships ready for action, her tactical officer reported. 4,000 support vessels, 800 mobile platforms, and approximately 50,000 automated combat drones. All vessels are equipped with our latest technological upgrades. Chun nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed human space as it existed now. A fortress network spanning 37 star systems, each one turned into a killing field designed to extract maximum cost from any invader. But today they wouldn't be fighting defensively. Communication from Earth Command, her communications officer announced. Secretary General Morrison appeared on the main screen, broadcasting from the underground command facility that had coordinated humanity's war effort. Behind him, Chun could see the controlled chaos of a species that had turned warfare into a science. Admiral Chun, you are authorized to proceed with Operation Homecoming. All human forces, military and civilian, are now under your tactical command. Chun acknowledged the transmission and turned to address her bridge crew. These weren't professional soldiers. Most had been civilians 18 months ago. But they were humans, which meant they had adapted to warfare with the same determination their species had always applied to survival challenges. Navigation. Set course for the Kytherian home system. All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. The human fleet vanished from normal space, beginning a journey that would have been impossible just 2 years earlier. Human faster-than-light technology had advanced beyond anything their initial crude systems could have achieved, incorporating not just stolen Kytherian knowledge, but innovations that the Empire's rigid technological development could never have produced. As the fleet traveled toward its destination, Chen reviewed intelligence reports that painted a picture of an empire in crisis. The initial conflict with humans had triggered exactly what Imperial strategists had feared: uprisings throughout Kytherian space, as subject species realized that resistance was possible. The Grozan Confederacy had been the first to rebel, using human-supplied technology to destroy the Imperial garrison forces in their home system. The Altarian Republic had followed, coordinating with human intelligence services to sabotage Imperial supply lines. Within months, 17 different species had declared independence from Kytherian rule. But it was the technological revolution that truly threatened the Empire's foundation. Humans hadn't just reverse-engineered Kytherian technology. They had shared their innovations freely with anyone willing to fight Imperial rule. The galaxy was experiencing a rapid technological advancement that was leveling the playing field between the Empire and its subjects. Admiral, incoming transmission from the Resistance Coalition, her communications officer reported. The main screen flickered to show a collection of alien faces representing a dozen different species. Chun recognized Ambassador Thex of the Grozan Confederacy and General Mordan of the Altarian Republic, but several of the others were species she had never encountered before the war began. Admiral Chun. Ambassador Thex spoke with a mechanical translation that made interspecies communication possible. Our combined fleets are in position. We stand ready to support the final assault. Chun felt a moment of profound satisfaction. 18 months ago, humanity had stood alone against an empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. Now, they led a coalition of free species that had turned imperial expansion into a galaxy-wide revolution. Understood, Ambassador. Begin your attacks on schedule. Remember, the goal isn't conquest, it's liberation. The transmission ended, and Chen returned her attention to the approaching Kytherian home system. Intelligence suggested that Emperor Kreshtar had withdrawn virtually all Imperial forces to defend the core worlds, abandoning the outer territories to concentrate everything around the systems that had been the Empire's foundation for 3,000 years. Emerging from hyperspace in 30 seconds, her navigation officer announced. The human fleet dropped back into normal space at the edge of the Kytheria Prime system, and Chun found herself looking at the most heavily defended star system in galactic history. The Empire had turned its home system into a fortress that should have been absolutely impregnable. Massive orbital platforms surrounded every world, each one mounting weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. The space between planets was filled with automated defense networks, minefields, and hidden weapon emplacements. The Imperial Home Fleet, over 3,000 of the Empire's most advanced warships, waited in battle formation around the primary world. Tactical assessment. Chen requested. Conservative estimates suggest we're outnumbered 4-1, Admiral. Their defensive platforms have firepower advantages of at least 3-1. If we follow conventional assault tactics, casualty projections exceed 90%. Chen smiled grimly. Humanity had stopped following conventional tactics the moment they realized they were fighting for their species' survival. Begin Operation Deathworld, she ordered. The human fleet didn't advance toward the Imperial defenses. Instead, they dispersed throughout the system, individual ships and small squadrons taking seemingly random positions. To Imperial observers, it must have looked like complete chaos, exactly what Chen intended. All vessels, begin environmental modifications, she commanded. Human ships started releasing massive clouds of particulate matter into space around them. Industrial mining equipment began cutting into asteroids and small moons, creating debris fields. Specialized vessels began broadcasting electromagnetic interference across multiple frequencies. Admiral, incoming transmission from the Imperial fleet, her communications officer reported. Emperor Kreshtar himself appeared on the screen, his alien features showing the strain of 18 months of constant warfare. Behind him, Chun could see the bridge of what was undoubtedly the Empire's most powerful vessel. Human Admiral, the Emperor spoke, his words transmitted through translation systems. Your fleet cannot possibly prevail against these defenses. I offer you one final opportunity for surrender. Chun considered her response carefully. This was the creature whose empire had dominated the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming force, who had never encountered serious resistance until humans refused to accept the inevitable. Emperor Kreshtar, she replied, you made a critical error when you chose to attack humanity. You assumed we would fight your war, using your tactics on your terms. But humans don't adapt to their environment. We make our environment adapt to us. She terminated the transmission and turned to her tactical officer. Status of environmental modifications? 30% complete, Admiral. The Imperial fleet is beginning to advance. They'll reach weapons range in approximately 12 minutes. Excellent. That should be enough. The space around the human fleet had been transformed into something that resembled the environment where humanity had evolved. Chaotic, dangerous, and constantly changing. Asteroid debris created cover and obstacles. Electromagnetic interference disrupted targeting systems. Particulate clouds made long-range sensors unreliable. All ships begin Phase 2. Human vessels started moving through the modified environment with an ease that their enemies couldn't match. Ships that had been built on Earth incorporated design principles learned from surviving in one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. They navigated through debris fields that would destroy other vessels, used electromagnetic interference to mask their movements, and treated the chaotic environment as an advantage rather than an obstacle. Imperial fleet is attempting to engage, the tactical officer reported. Their targeting systems are having difficulty acquiring locks through the interference. Chun watched as Kytherian ships, designed for combat in the clean vacuum of space, struggled to operate in the environmental chaos humans had created. Their weapons, optimized for precise targeting, were largely ineffective in conditions that changed moment by moment. But humans had evolved fighting volcanoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, and predators that could kill them instantly if they made a mistake. Combat in a chaotic environment wasn't a disadvantage. It was coming home. Begin targeted strikes on orbital platforms, Chen ordered. Human ships emerged from debris clouds and electromagnetic storms to attack Imperial installations with weapons that had been specifically designed to exploit Kytherian weaknesses. Every failed defense over the past 18 months had provided data about Imperial technology. Every engagement had revealed new vulnerabilities. More importantly, humans had learned to fight as a single organism rather than individual units. Ships coordinated through quantum entanglement communications that couldn't be jammed. Tactical information flowed instantly between all vessels. When one ship discovered an effective attack method, the entire fleet adopted it immediately. Admiral, massive energy signatures detected throughout the system. Her sensor officer reported with excitement. It's the coalition fleets. Space around Kytheria Prime suddenly, filled with ships from dozens of different species, all using human-supplied technology and human-developed tactics. The Grozen Confederacy's massive assault ships emerged from hyperspace alongside Altarian Republic stealth vessels. Species that had been enemies for centuries were fighting together under human coordination. But these weren't the same species that had been conquered by the Empire decades or centuries ago. 18 months of human technological sharing had transformed them into forces capable of challenging Imperial rule. All coalition forces, you are clear to engage, Chun broadcast. Remember, we're here to liberate, not conquer. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of the methodical, predictable warfare that had characterized Imperial expansion, this was chaotic, adaptive combat where tactics changed moment by moment based on immediate battlefield conditions. Human ships used debris fields for cover, while coalition vessels provided suppressing fire. Grozen assault ships rammed Imperial platforms, while human engineers disabled their shields. Alterian stealth ships appeared in impossible locations, having used human navigation technology to plot hyperspace jumps with precision the Empire couldn't match. Most devastating of all was the realization that spread through Imperial ranks as the battle progressed. Their enemies were learning faster than Imperial forces could adapt. Every successful Imperial tactic was immediately countered by modifications that spread instantly through the attacking fleet. Emperor Kreshtar is requesting communication. Chen's communications officer reported as Imperial defenses began collapsing throughout the system. Chun accepted the transmission and found herself looking at an alien leader whose empire was ending before his eyes. The Emperor's bridge showed damage from weapons that had somehow penetrated the Empire's most advanced defenses. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had finally understood that a civilization's fundamental assumptions about warfare were wrong. "Unconditional surrender," Chun replied. "Complete withdrawal of Imperial forces from all occupied systems. Recognition of independence for all species that choose freedom over Imperial rule. And if I refuse?" Chun gestured toward her tactical displays, which showed Imperial defenses collapsing across the home system while coalition fleets advanced on the primary world. "Then, your empire ends today, and every species you've conquered for the last 3,000 years becomes free anyway. The choice is whether that happens with or without the complete destruction of your civilization." The Emperor stared at displays showing the collapse of everything his people had built over millennia. The empire that had seemed eternal was dissolving as subject species throughout the galaxy declared independence, supported by human technology and protected by coalition forces. "I surrender," he said, the words coming from an individual who had never contemplated the possibility of defeat. Chun felt no satisfaction in the moment. Victory had cost humanity dearly. Millions had died in 18 months of total war. But those deaths had purchased something unprecedented in galactic history. Proof that no empire was too large to resist, no conquest too complete to reverse. "All coalition forces, cease fire," she broadcast. "The war is over." As the largest battle in galactic history ended, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship and contemplated what humanity had accomplished. They had started as a primitive species on a single hostile world. 18 months later, they led a coalition that had overthrown the galaxy's dominant empire and established the principle that freedom was worth any cost to defend. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of imperial expansion had ended, replaced by an era where species could choose their own destinies without fearing conquest by superior forces. And at the center of this transformation stood humanity, a species that had learned the most important lesson any civilization could master, that survival wasn't about avoiding challenges, but about becoming strong enough to overcome them. The Deathworld had taught them well.